I'm going to show you how to make single welt cord for all of your sewing projects, like this slipcover, for a pillow, for your upholstery projects, for your duvet covers. Single welt cord can be used for all kinds of different sewing projects. So let's get started. Here we are at my cutting table, and I'm going to make welt for the slipper chair that I was sitting in the intro. This is the fabric that I'm using. I'm doing a contrasting welt on that slipper chair because I have a very tight fabric budget for the two chairs. So I had to do my welt out of a contrast in order to save fabric, and just because I do like the contrast of the blue. I've got my roll of fabric here. If you want to make a full yard, then you just measure up a yard, cut it off, and then you would fold up one corner in order to create a bias fold here. So this is the bias of the fabric, which is diagonal from the warp, which runs long ways, and the weft, which is selvage to selvage. And if you'll notice that the bias is stretchy, that's why you cut your welt on the bias, because there is a little bit of stretch there, and that allows your welt to go around curves and corners easily without buckling or without getting puckers in it. So that's why you want to cut your welt on the bias. If you can't, because you just don't have enough fabric to cut on the bias, you can make it on the straight grain. It just doesn't work as well. I'm only going to cut a half a yard of welt instead of a full yard because I don't need that much. So I like to unroll my fabric and then fold it in half, selvage to selvage. And I already know that this cut is very straight and square. That's important to start with your fabric straight, square, and on grain. And I have a whole video on that. And just get my selvages lined up. Lining it up straight across my cutting mat. And the reason why I fold it in half like that is because my fabric is 54 inches, my ruler is only 48, so I can't cut a straight across there, so I fold it in half so I can just do it in one cut. Okay, so now I actually did 20 inches instead of 18. Now I've got my full width selvage to selvage, and I'm going to fold this corner up to create a bias piece here, rotate it around so that my fold is along the line of my cutting mat, and then I start cutting here. Since I have a rotary cutter and cutting mat, this makes this process really fast and easy, especially if you have a sharp blade. Let's see if this one's sharper. And you just work your way up the piece of fabric. So I'll just keep going all the way up this piece. Now, if you had cut yourself a full yard, you would have much longer strips, which that's the idea. Then you have less seams on your welt. So that's the way to do it. Go ahead and cut a full yard so that you have longer pieces, less seaming together, less seam. That makes sense. If you don't have a rotary cutter and a mat, clearly you can just mark pencil lines or chalk lines on your fabric and cut with scissors. My upholstery mentor cut all of his welt like this, all scissor cutting. So I've got some strips here. I'm going to cut a few more because I do need pretty much a full half a yard of welt for that chair. It takes more than you think. Here we are at my sewing machine. I've got my strips of fabric all stacked here, and I'm going to take two of them. Now, if you have cut in the method that I just showed you at the table, every strip will be cut diagonally like this on both ends. You're going to match up the diagonal strips like this. So you're going to create a right angle with the two diagonal strips of fabric. So we want to sew it right side to right side, of course. So I've already got one seam in here. So I'm going to continue up the right side of the fabric, and I'm going to match up this diagonal to this diagonal. So it makes a right angle. The two strips make a right angle. So I'm going to sew from this point right here down here to this point right here. And I put this on a little bit shorter of a stitch, not my longest stitch, because there is a good bit of tension on this. So now you can see What I mean by sewing, I sewed from there down to there. And now when we open that up, that creates a straight 2-inch strip. Then we'll take this to the sewing machine, we'll press that seam open, and then that will pretty much disappear on the welt. So that's what we're gonna do. So then what I do is I just follow that right side up, hold it, grab my next piece, match that up with my 2 tails, sew corner to corner. Same thing, follow the right side up, hold that in my right hand, grab the next piece, match it up. And you could continue on and not cut, but I find it's easier this way because you want to make sure that you keep your right side to your right side. One thing that you want to keep in mind when you're using like a velvet is that when you open this up, you want to make sure that the grain of your fabric is all running in the same direction, because with a velvet in particular, if this is running in one direction and then the seam and this is going in a different direction, this and this will actually look like 2 different colors. So just pay attention to that. And then if you have like a very slubby or very apparent graining on your fabric, just make sure that that's kind of all running in the same direction from piece to piece. That's something that's a pretty advanced thing to be thinking about even when you're just starting. So in the beginning, I would just worry about getting your strips to put together. I wouldn't worry so much about matching the grain or that kind of a thing on Welt. That's something that I can show you more in depth in a membership or in a course. I'm switching to a thread that matches my fabric. That way, if a little bit of the thread is peeking out, you won't see it. And this does not need to be upholstery weight thread. You can just use, this is actually serger thread. You can use a lightweight thread here because this doesn't need, it's going to be sewn over a couple times. My seams are pressed open and I've got my welt cord and my strips of fabric. Put the welt cord right into the center of the strip of fabric. We wrap that around and then we're going to sew that together. Now you can either use a zipper foot and just drop your zipper foot right next to the welt cord, or if you have a welt foot, you can use that. I don't. So, and I've got my welt on my welt is on this kind of like what used to be a floor lamp post. Took the lamp off and just have the post and the heavy base there, and all my welt and zippers is on there, and I can just pull and it turns like that. If you'd like to see a tour of how I have my stuff set up in my sewing room, let me know in the comments below. I can do another sewing room tour with a little more detail. Okay, so let's get to sewing this. Okie dokie. There is a half a yard of welt. This might not be a complete full half yard, but probably pretty close. And that one single slipper chair will probably take up this whole bit with the body and then including the cushion. If you want to see how this goes into a slipcover, then click on that video right here. See you over there.